You sure about this? I know, we've had this dialogue several times at this point. I'm ready if you are. You ready? Let's do it then. The time of the lone wolf watchman starts now. Roll it. Hello everyone, and welcome to Time for Truth. I am J.C. Williams, your lone wolf watchman for the duration. Welcome. We will have a show on that subject of the lone wolf watchman probably after this show, unless we get into a part 2 of this particular episode, which is very possible. I'm looking at the world right now, and my general displeasure has become something amplified to the point where I feel that it's time we've got some fundamental issues that need to be addressed. I'm going to be fair to everyone, and again, I'm presenting things to you as I see them. Now, I've been in this as an adult going on 14 years now. I'm in it every day. I'm reading every day. And I know the history of my faith. It's very important to know that history. But it's also very important to be able to make separation between authorities and faith. And we've come to a point in history now where we need some clarity on this matter. So we've got some questions that need to be answered. And if you're ready, let's get right to it. So the first question by my estimation that we have to ask is, Maestro, what is Israel? Now, before we get started, a word about a couple of things here. Now, this thing you see nestled upon my PowerFlex Gym beanie, of which I am a member. There is no sponsorship here. I have no sponsors. Hell, I don't know if anybody even watches this show. I have a feeling someday people will be watching this show around some campfire in a bunker as they try to charge up what laptop that they can find and watch this and sitting there going, oh, okay, yeah, okay, now it makes sense. Now I understand, but I digress. And also the glasses. I don't really need glasses to see, but I like to have them on for reading. I used to wear them because, I thought, well, it makes you look kind of smart. Now I just don't care. But I do need them for my notes, which I will be referencing in this segment. So let's get to it. Okay, so the question here is, what is Israel? Is it the state of Israel? The government of Israel? Survey says, wrong. No. For our purposes here, you're going to get the very truncated version of the history of Israel and what is Israel. Now, this thing on my head is a design. This is a traditional prayer cap that was worn by the first century saints to differentiate them from your everyday follower of the Sanhedrin, of the Pharisees, the Pershim, the Sadducees, the Zadokim, if we're using Hebrew. They wanted to make sure to set themselves apart. You know, there came a point where, they didn't have to, hide out in the rented room or whatever. And we'll get into all that when we get into our next segment. But when I first started studying the history of this faith, my teacher, he has one of these, very nice, much nicer than mine, by 5 million country miles. And I thought, well, maybe I'll wear it for the show. But then I looked at it by itself on my head and said, dude, you look like a dork. So it was, just something a little more basic. But again, things are changing. I'm changing a little bit. The set's changed just a little bit. And the approach is going to change just a little bit. I want to try to keep things short because I just don't like super long episodes of shows or videos. These people on YouTube that perpetually make hour-and-a-half long videos. Some of these people I'm very interested in, and some of the subjects that they broach I'm very interested in, but man, who has an hour to commit? It's like, let's get to it, let's get to the point. So with that in mind, let's get to it. And I will reference my notes here a little bit, which is why I've got the glasses on. It's a little easier to see and a little easier to read. So let's do it. So let's go ahead and start with Isaac and Jacob, or more to the point, let's start with Jacob. Now, as we know, the story goes, Jacob had a wrestling match with the angel of the Lord, of Yehovah. Some people say that he had a wrestling match with God himself, Interesting side note, I was watching a video yesterday, it was talking about referencing the angel of the Lord, that this angel never appears in the New Testament, only in the Old Testament. So this particular individual had come to the conclusion that the angel of the Lord is actually the Word, Yeshua, Jesus, to you Greeks and Romans out there, present, right up there next to the Almighty in the throne. Interesting theory. I don't know if this is true or not. There are a lot of things in Scripture, in particular, you want to talk about something that's always been kind of unsettling to me, is how Jacob pretty much conned his brother out of his inheritance as the first son. Now, people will defend that and say, well, Esau just disregarded his inheritance. He threw it to the wind. The man was out hunting for the family. He was out trying to provide for everyone. I'm sorry, that's not an excuse. And who helped him? A woman. His mama helped him to do that. So right from the get-go, we've got something that's a little bit, if you're a person of hell, not even justice, but a person of tradition, you're going to find that to be somewhat unsettling, but as I've learned, people will make excuses for anything. Now, I give the sages, the ones not just from the time of the Second Temple era, but going forward, when we get into, I'll make sure I get this gentleman's name right, Maimonides or Maimonides. I've actually got a couple of his texts, and then later down the road, his opposition sage, Nachmanides, he's constantly calling him to account. So it's kind of fun to read the different perspectives between these two. But as much grief as I give these folks, because what they've done is, instead of practicing, and this is a theme you're going to read over and over and over and over and over and over again in the Old Testament, instead of just sticking to God's commandments, which they were told you don't add to, you don't subtract from, they create their own Library of Congress of extra biblical nonsense, which comprises the modern day holy mission of the people who are in charge of this current state of Israel, of what people call Zionists, and then they've got their little neocon buddy backers here at home who are corporate billionaires, many of them involved in the military-industrial complex, if not also, in other areas of technology and, big dollar businesses. No war ever came about in the modern era without one of those folks getting it underway. They've spent their entire lives fomenting hatred and distrust. And we're going to get into that a little bit down the road. But getting back to what I was saying about the sages, we got to remember as we go through this that the tendency to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater is something that you've got to be aware of at all times. And the sages actually have a name for, or a phrase for, what I'm sort of talking about with Jacob and Esau. It's called chukim. And what it is, statutes, or in this case, actions whose purpose remains incomprehensible to the human mind. And this gets applied to certain commandments, and I can live with that. That's okay. I don't know God's mind. You don't know God's mind. So, again, there's value to be found in many places. There's definitely value to be found in really studying the commandments of God, and not just, straight in Scripture, but reading the dissertations of this particular sage and his opposition has helped me to understand on what level that these folks are thinking on. And that's very important, because there are a lot of people out there who want you to be a joiner, and I'm no longer a joiner. I let that go. That's why I am the lone wolf watchman, because in the end, we all go to face and to answer alone. We don't get to have Pastor McToothygrin on our right sitting there advocating for us. And by that point, he's probably already been thrown over the abyss like Marshall Llewellyn Holly on a routine expedition going, over the waterfall, except there ain't no water below, but I digress. So, from the time of Jacob and the tribes, and then eventually we'll have the Exodus. Let's go ahead and just get through that. Let's get to Solomon, because this is something I want to touch on very briefly, and then we'll move on to the last part of this segment. Now, Solomon, as you know, was considered the wisest man who ever lived. However, and this is something I caught when I was reading Samuel, Samuel lays out the rules of what a king can and cannot do. And when Solomon becomes king, right off the bat, he breaks two of the cardinal ones up in his number of wives and also in his number of horses. And I wrote to my teacher to try to get an answer to this question. Never heard anything back, but I think I have a good understanding on this now, and let me explain to you why. You see, Solomon, in his wisdom, and if you go on to read Proverbs, you get Solomon the wise years. But when we get to Ecclesiastes, we see what Solomon's life has become. At that point, long story short, nothing has meaning. All is vanity. This man is basically a walking husk of a former human being who was in line with the will of the Father and blessed. And why did this happen? My take on this, and history backs it up, is that, and Scripture backs it up as well, in his pursuit of wisdom, his vanity took over, and he started pursuing what people call the mysteries, the ancient mysteries, things that go back to Babylon, things that may in fact even predate Babylon and human history as we currently understand it. Now, I'm not going to go down the BitChute rabbit hole and talk about civilizations that may or may not have existed, nor do I know if there is another world on the other side of the ice wall to the North Pole, okay? Not my area of expertise, and frankly, at this point, I'm not all that intrigued by that. That may change down the road, but there's just not enough hard evidence. Now, I've seen video of Pharaoh's chariots, the remnants, strewn across the bottom of the Red Sea. I've seen video of the stone altar at the base of Mount Sinai in Arabia, where you can clearly see the depictions of Apis and Hathor, the Egyptian cow gods, on the stone. It's there. So until someone produces video of the secret earth, as it were, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to do that. But getting back into Solomon, and then eventually his son, who was responsible for the split of the kingdoms, King Solomon, is, in my estimation, a great reflection upon who these entities truly are. These are the people that financed and put Mr. Epstein on his creepy island. These are the people that foment wars, that cause hatred, distrust, and, They're going to get theirs. But until such time, it's pretty obvious at this point, the show's over. The word's out. These folks went and very hastily killed a young man who only wanted to do and represent three things: the will of the Almighty, the teachings of our Messiah, and the truth. And that was a threat to them. And they jumped right in. They took him out, but they didn't account for a lot of things. They aren't as hip as they think they are. Their age has really shown in this affair, and the wall's down. Like so many years, centuries in the past, millennia, they went out and hurriedly killed the lamb. And now you're going to get the lion. It is what it is. But that is not to be co-joined at the hip with the people who live in Israel. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I pray better for them. If you are a Jew in the world, I'm telling you, living in Tel Aviv, living anywhere near Jerusalem, I'm sorry, that's the last place you want to be. Unless you're doing very well in life and, you're a part of the inner circle. But for the everyday Israelite, it's not a picnic. And it's my understanding that a lot of the folks over there are not happy with that government. I wouldn't be happy with that government. Like I've said before, everybody wants to talk about how Vladimir Putin is this emperor who stayed in power long after his usefulness has expired. Well, what about Mr. Netanyahu? If somebody was the president of the United States that long, well, they wouldn't be a president of the United States that long. They wouldn't last. That's all I'm going to say about that. But, I know that they are trying desperately to get something new, and they need something new, because the folks that are in charge right now, they and their little minions throughout the world and in the intelligence communities and in the business communities and everywhere else, as far as I'm concerned, they can all go off to their, creepy little unnamed island, perform their sick little rituals inside whatever they call a temple, while their women weep for Tammuz on the roof, just like they did in the Old Testament. And let your people go. They deserve better. I want to close this segment at least, with a reading from Isaiah. We're going to be looking at Isaiah 63:15. This caught my eye the other night when I was in my reading. I've just finished Isaiah. I'm in Jeremiah now. And again, just to show you here in the Tanakh, this is wonderful. As much grief as I give the Greek scholars, at least they have the honesty to put in the footnotes when they are uncertain about a translation. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Anybody who thinks that we've got this thing down pat, I'm telling you, we're just scratching the surface on this, and you can take that to the bank. So, let me have a little sip of sweet tea here. I love sweet tea. Loved it since I was a kid. My great-grandmother made it for me when I was a youngster. I loved it then. I love it now. So let's go. Isaiah 63:15. I don't put text up. Just open your ears and listen, okay? I don't have all the time in the world for editing. Here we go. Look down from heaven and see. From your holy and glorious height, where is your zeal, your power, your yearning, and your love are being withheld from us? Surely you are our Father, though Abraham regard us not, and Israel regard us not. Stop. That's intriguing, isn't it? So, when I first started reading Isaiah, I knew going in that in his prophecies, he tends to jump around on timelines. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about that, and I did, excuse me. So Isaiah uses a process called prophetic foreshortening. And what this is, aside from being somewhat confusing at times and inconvenient to say the least, but this is what forces us to study and to learn more and to learn that a thing like prophetic foreshortening exists. So, getting back to this really quick, though Abraham regard us not, and Israel recognize us not. My friends, that's obviously got to be a future. So what we can see here is that we've got a delineation. There's a division here. And this is what I'm trying to get across to you. Not that we aren't connected to the children of Jacob, but we have no obligation to these heathen masters, so they like to think of themselves as masters, who are perpetrating all this evil in the world. We don't owe them anything. Nothing. If anything, we owe them a swift kick in their ass. And I think they're going to get it. I know I'm going to do my part because I care about the people who live over there in the Mideast, not just in Israel proper, but the other people who live in the surrounding lands. Would you want to live somewhere where you don't know if today is truly, not just in a philosophical sense like we do in America, oh man, there's promised tomorrow. Well, yeah, that's true. But, what if no man is promised even to make it through the night's sleep without getting blown up at the behest of people who are either religious zealots or clinically insane, And I'm not going to bring Islam into this conversation. I'm not even going to bother wasting my time with that. I've read enough of Muhammad's writings in context to know just wrong when I see it. And a few flowery phrases about peace and submission will never, ever negate, kill anyone who doesn't believe what we believe. Expansion is a mandate. No. I say every man to their tent and keep your happy ass there. Live your life, and don't bother the man who doesn't believe as you believe. You don't bother him, he won't bother you. It's like the entire Mideast needs to go to kindergarten, for God's sake. But I digress. Anyway. So let's go ahead and just stop that one there. But we're not done yet. We've got another question that we have to ask. And obviously, that question is going to be, Don Pardo. What is Christianity? Well, if you watch this show regularly, you definitely have an idea of what I feel Christianity is not. But tonight, for our purposes, I want to get into the history of our faith, our stolen faith. Thank you. And talk a little bit about the beginnings of this, because I'm telling you, the beginning of this faith was much more exciting than what we're currently dealing with. So everybody just kind of kick back here and bear with me. So, after the resurrection and the conversion of Shaul, Paul, to you Westerners who think that everybody in the Bible was living in the Mideast with an English name like Paul and James, you do realize the letter J didn't even exist until about the 1500s, right? But I digress. Language is important. History is important. Names are important. The name of the Father is important. The name of Messiah is important. Yeshua. Now, all you folks out there doing the, what sounds like not to be rude, but it kind of reminds me of the shortened Native American tongue. Like you're coughing something up. I don't know where you're getting that from, but I'm going to take the word of the world's most preeminent Bible scholar, who has actually handled some of the most protected and do not touch with human hands documents on the face of the earth, like the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex, over some guy on Instagram. So anyway, at least you're not, using the Roman Greek variant. So I'll give you a, what was it the teacher used to give? You used to get the silver star, I think. Not when you got the gold star, but you'd get the silver star. Or maybe the blue star or something. I don't know. It's been too long since I've been in grade school. But I digress. So, basically, you've got Paul, Shaul, has his conversion. But before he starts his mission, which has been misinterpreted quite a bit and misunderstood at the very least. He goes to Sinai in Saudi Arabia, which he confirms later in Scripture. And why does he do this? Because his entire world has been turned upside down. You have to understand who Shaul was. He wasn't just another learner in the temple system. He was the apple of everyone's eye within that organization. He was more than likely being groomed to one day ascend to the role of high priest among the Sanhedrin. So losing him was a huge deal. And we're talking about a man, and keep this in mind. Why was he chosen to minister to the Gentiles? Why? Because he knew the Torah and the commandments inside and out. He wasn't recruited. Well, in a way, he was recruited for his knowledge of the Prushim and the sages, because that made it easier for him to delineate between the commandments of God and the extra biblical writings, these traditions, which God had told Moses and Israel right from the beginning. Don't do that. You do what I tell you to do. You don't add to it. You don't subtract from it. You do it. Execute. You know? Have your ruminations about things if you want to. Declare it your king if you want to. But don't go messing with my laws. You do that, you're going to suffer. And suffer they did. Repeatedly, time and time again. So Paul's world is upside down. And his mission in this, aside from helping to start these new congregations. I hate the phrase church planting. It's just, ugh. I associate that with the West and all of the nonsense that goes with it. No. Paul's primary mission was to reconcile the commandments in the Torah. How does this fit in to this new reality now that Messiah has come? What is applicable here? What is no longer a part of the program? And yes, there were changes. Now, this is just my take on the situation, but when Yeshua paid, again, Jesus to you, Romans and Greeks, we'll learn you yet, when he paid the death penalty incurred at Mount Sinai by the children of Israel, right? When Moses went up the hill, couldn't turn his back for 2 seconds without them doing what they shouldn't do. They incurred the death penalty, you know? And that's why the sacrifice of livestock and fowl was instituted, you know? God wanted them to know, yeah, you're going to take the very best of your flock. You're going to raise that little lamb. You know, your children are going to sit there and nurse it and hold it, love it, and cuddle it. And guess what? You're going to kill it with your own hands because you screwed up. It was a reminder, a solemn reminder. You know, I know there's a lot of people out there, myself included, who have a heart for animals. You know, can you imagine raising a pup or a kitten or whatever from the time it's a baby? And you have to emotionally detach yourself from that animal, from its life, from its eyes looking at you. And you have to go kill it because you screwed up. That's what that was all about. Just thinking about it is very serious. It's heavy stuff. But when Yeshua became sin and he paid that penalty in the most gruesome, horrifying way imaginable, something occurred that you don't read about in Scripture, and I'm going to tell you this story. Now, I may have this a little bit backwards. I had intended to try to watch this video of the story again to get everything straight, but the point here is to get the point. Okay, so bear with me. Granny sweet tea. Cheers, Granny. So good. All right, so after Yeshua was crucified, there was a tradition that was in place among the Pharisees, among the Sanhedrin, at least during the Second Temple period, probably maybe even prior to that, but I'm not sure if it was part of the First Temple period era or not. But when the Passover lamb was sacrificed every year, once all the festivities of the day were done, the high priest would take the wool, a portion of the wool from the sacrificial lamb that would be corded into a rope of, 2-3 feet in length, and they would tie the temple doors shut with that cord of that lamb's wool, which was now a cord, a rope. And they would come back the next day. Now, the wool, as I understand, and I could have this backwards, but the wool was dipped in the blood of that sacrificial lamb, tied to the door. The temple was closed. Everybody split. They would come back the next day. And every year prior to the crucifixion, to the sacrifice of Yeshua, that white wool cord that was dipped in blood would be white, snow white, the next day, signifying that the sins of the people had been taken away. The year that Yeshua was crucified, that cord at the temple, from then on out, never turned white again. Now again, I could have this backwards, because it would make sense that if it was white and then became red, it would say that the blood had been paid for by the lamb. And I do apologize for not having that 100% correct. But the account, either way, is documented in the history of that particular religious sect. It's not in Scripture. This is an outside source verifying something that I think we should all feel is incredibly important. So what this tells me is that the need for the livestock and the fowl sacrifice has been taken care of, or at least the need for a Passover lamb. The other sacrifices of, calves, rams, goats, oxen, that's up for debate. There are certain people within the Messianic community who feel that the sacrifices should be reinstituted. I can't say. I like, as far as I'm concerned, the meal offering and things that don't involve the spilling of blood, I don't see any problem with that. But then again, you got to remember, there's no temple to go take these things to. And when the third and final one comes, believe me, it's not going to be built because God wanted it built. It'll be built for, let's just say, other reasons, by other powers, for other purposes. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about the faith and how it was stolen. And it was stolen. So Paul goes out, the disciples go out, and as time goes on, it's one thing to have one individual who has the power to manifest healing, who has the power, who knows things that only you think that you and you alone or your little group know, and he just calls you on it right on the spot. It's one thing for one person to have that. But when you start having a group of people who are manifesting that kind of power, and the word's getting out, whoever's running the kingdoms, whoever the powers that be at the time are getting wind of this, they're going to see that as a threat. Now, one of the only things, if not the only thing, that Dan Brown and, more to the point, Ron Howard got right in their little fantasy tale known as the Da Vinci Code was in one of the historical flashbacks where you see Rome, and there's a pagan temple in Rome, it's probably Venus or Diana or whatever, and these women are out dancing in front of it, doing their pagan dance, this, that, and so forth. And here come the followers of Yeshua, and they're burning these places to the ground. And they're doing these things and manifesting power. And it's becoming very obvious that these folks are on the rise. You see, the Christians that the Romans were throwing to the lions weren't these, docile disciples of Pastor McToothygrin. No, these folks were hardcore. And not all of them, but some of them had amazing spiritual gifts. And in the future, when everything starts going to hell, that's going to happen again. And those who are in alignment with the will of the Father, those who are following his instructions, attuning their minds, their hearts, their spirits, and their bodies, if they are chosen as such, they will manifest powers greater than those. You think dropping Ananias and Sapphira dead on the floor is a neat little hat trick. That's nothing compared to what's coming. There will be people who will say, mountain jump, and mountain's gonna jump. They will be defenders. They will protect those who are walking. And if you get in their way, Your soon-to-be very short life will regret ever crossing their path. It's coming. So, to get back to where we were, Rome sees this as a threat. And so, the great Emperor Constantine decides that he's going to start a kingdom-wide universal religion. And he's going to appropriate the teachings, more like just appropriate whatever's convenient to his new pagan religion dressed up in what he's going to call Christianity. This guy was a lifelong pagan. He murdered his own family. He didn't walk with God. And he's the foundation. Are you kidding me? Did you think for 1 minute that that Peter would have anything to do with that? You are out of your ever-loving mind. This old Catholic neighbor of mine tried to tell me that Peter was the first pope. Because I respect my elders, I just, well, that's very interesting. Went on my way. Nice little exercise, and, sometimes, you don't have to throw your debate hat into the ring. And to be fair to her husband, who was a deacon in that particular church, as well as the Knight of Columbus, they had seen some pretty powerful things in their lives because, they were of that generation that my great-grandparents were, which was one of the reasons that I liked renting from them, because they reminded me of my great-grandparents quite a bit. But, when they retired from, whatever work he was an aircraft mechanic at the local Air Force base out here at Kirtland. And, they spent their retirement years just service, being of service. They had a Winnebago they used to load up and take food and water down south to Hatch and down into the areas where the migrant farm workers were working and make sure that they had water and they were feeding them. And, everything they did was what we're supposed to be doing. So again, I'm trying to tell you, you've got to separate people from these religious politicians. We'll get to that again. So, Constantine, at the point of a sword, basically takes Yeshua, dresses him up as the new Mithra, puts the Egyptian sun disk around his head. This is one of the reasons that the rabbis in Israel send those guys out in the law students, the youngsters and trainees to the bus station and the airport with this challenge that my teacher took years ago about 10 questions you had to answer from the Bible. The point was, to keep Christians from proselytizing in Israel, because, let's face it, whether we like it or you like it or I like it or whoever likes it or not, these folks know the history of pagan sun god worship, and when they see a Messiah decked head to toe in pagan imagery, they're not going to follow that. Come on, be real. Anyway, so getting back to Rome, they appropriate the faith, they transform it into a control system, and they get the Greeks to basically, okay, you're going to be the translators, and you better be translating what we want you to translate. And so we've got people now who are going through the Dr. Jones and Jonathan, his head translator and transcriptions, who are going through these original Hebrew manuscripts in books of the New Testament outside of what we already have in the chronological Gospels, which is the 4 Gospels and the Acts and the Revelation. But they're looking at stuff like James and Jude. And of course, the Acts are a part of the chronological Gospels. Well, and they're doing that. But I encourage you to go check out their work, because what we really need more than anything, and I'm addressing this directly to you, Jonathan, and to you, Dr. Jones, we need Shaul's letters clarified. That's the key to everything. That's the final frontier. Because his mission in reconciling the Torah is really going to lay a completely different foundation and bring even more truth and fact to this thing, which is what we need. So, long story short, Rome appropriates, Greek translates, it goes down through all these different things, culminating in English, across the seas to the west. Dispensational Western replacement theology. Here we are today, and now we have Pastor McToothy Grant in his basketball arena, and Dr. Joyce sent me money for my Merle Norman makeup collection, and it's a farce. The whole thing in the West is a farce, and it's just grounded in absolute nonsense. And you need look no further than, and I'm not going to bother to name names because you know who these people are. They're shilling for the evil that has taken over and is suppressing not just people, but their own people. It's coming to light now that there are people, soldiers in the IDF, who are committing suicide because they've been asked, forced, ordered to kill their own people for false flag purposes. I'm sorry. I'm not going to sit here and just sweep that under the rug. That's evil. Evil is evil is evil. And Yeshua was not about evil. And the Father most certainly was not about evil. And if there's anything that the Old Testament has taught us time and again, the prophets, you stray from his instructions. You go your own way. You create your religious system. You create your world system, whatever it is. But you cast him aside, he'll let out the chain on you, the leash, as long as he wants to let it. But eventually, he's going to yank that chain. And I'm telling you right now, this evil that's manifesting itself in the world, when that chain gets yanked, they shall not soon forget it, or the Father who pulled it. I'm not going to go ahead and read the entirety of Isaiah 59, because we're running late, I think, as it is. But I would encourage you to do so. Isaiah 59. Put that in the pot and let it marinate. And remember, man, In this age, once you become, the path to true freedom in this age is as an individual, with your own thoughts, with your own reason. Use the intelligence, the eyes, the ears, the brain that God gave you, and learn. Because once you become a joiner, you've lost. There's only one authority in this world. There's only one Messiah. And he's coming back. He came once. And if you're trying to help God with his work, if you think you're going to restore the boundary that he set by your hands, and that doing so is going to help manifest the Messiah that you've been waiting for, he's already come. And the one that's coming back, depending on where you stand, you may or may not like that situation. I hope everyone has a great new year, a great rest of the week, and always, always remember, Mr. Clark, take us out of here. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time, and God bless. Good night.